nonfiction writer. You published the book, A Question of Freedom. Are you still working in the nonfiction genre?
I am. I mean, I think if you're a writer, you just kind of write. But I have a book that I need to finish. And it's always a process, though. And I also think that, like, the process of writing is also partly figuring out what it is that you have to say, and then figuring out how to say it well. And so I worked on this book for a long time, and I'm really happy with how it came out. And I think that once this next book is published, I'll be able to say the same thing. Like I'll at least be able to say I worked on it for a long time.
Yeah.
And I hope I'll also be able to say I like the way it came out. But
do you mind talking a little bit about what it's about, or?
I don't know what it's about. No, I know it's called Circumference of a Prison, and it's kind of named after that poem, Diameter of a Bomb.
Yes.
And it's sort of about the impact of incarceration, but it's about the impact of incarceration outside of prison. And so it's a series of like essays and meditations on different things that sort of I've confronted both in my work as an advocate. I was the spokesperson for the Campaign for Youth Justice, but I also did a lot of speaking around the country, talking about juveniles going to prison and being in prison with adults. And so a lot of the poetry has come out of that experience. But a lot of the poetry, both this book and the previous book, has been really internal. It's been really, or not even just internal, it's just like focused on me, but focused on sort of, the experiences and the things that like people and men like me and that I know have sort of dealt with in terms of going through being incarcerated. This other book, I think, is me trying to look more outward and at the experience. And even when I am talking about like my own experiences or people who had experiences similar to mine, I want to talk about those experiences outside of the setting in the context of prison, and talk about those experiences, in the world. So you're talking about how difficult it is to get a job sometimes. You're talking about how difficult it is to get into college. You're talking about how difficult it is to sort of rebuild your life, especially in a world that, of all the things that we value in America, one of the things that we don't really value, right, is mercy, is rehabilitation. We value redemption stories once they're actualized, but I don't think we value redemption as a principle, especially when you're looking towards the future.
But you also talked about sort of your ambivalence in terms of the memoir genre, because we love redemption stories. So if we read a redemption story, we feel good, and we stop being worried about whether or not the system is just or unjust.
And it's I mean, like, I like memoirs, and I've been reading memoirs since I was a kid, and I would say, like, I would revise that statement and say that I've learned a lot about living from reading memoirs. My ambivalence might be that memoirs, depending on what you write about, right, but memoirs tend to focus on redemption and like experience, and when those experiences have sort of national relevance and significance, sometimes it's troubling the way you see those memoirs not translate to those conversations. But then again, that changes, and sometimes that might not even be the fault of like the public. It's just the fault of the writer, because I wrote a memoir and it was decent, and I think that I had great conversations about the book with people, and I got a chance to go to places and speak. And I think if I value those people, then I acknowledge that the memoir worked in that way. And then you look at, Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, Between the World and Me. It's not a memoir, but it does mine personal experience, and it juxtaposes the public with the private, and it creates, this conversation. And it's a vibrant conversation, and I think it's a conversation that I was talking to this guy I know, and we talked on the phone for like an hour about fatherhood, parenting, about our relationships with our own fathers. And a lot of the conversations stem from, he's an artist too, but it stemmed from his work, my work, and this thing that we had in common, which was Ta-Nehisi Coates' book. So the point is that I think there is possibility in memoir, and at that moment, probably what I was expressing was the frustration and like the desires for my own book to lead to a conversation that reverberated more. Maybe I was disappointed, because the thing is, you write the book and you talk about juveniles being in prison, and you talk about your own experiences. You want juveniles to stop going to prison, and you want people to have a real conversation about, sentencing of young people when they've committed crimes, and frequently like admit to committing crimes and just want something, like some second chance, some hope, some sense of hope. You write these things and you talk about these things and you want to see change, and then change is like slow and coming. And so some of that is just the frustration and saying that you get tired of feeling like, you know, I'm here, but I can name a dozen people who should be here. And it's just frustrating when you're in a space in which you feel like you are the poster child for change that has not yet happened, you know. But this is cat, Emil Cabral, somebody sent me something that he wrote, and he said, you know, you have to invent the future, which I think is like a compelling thing and a compelling way to envision the world and imagine the world and to sort of think about the work that we're doing. Because if it is inventing the future, then something like memoir engages, I think, in that product, because it can. Because and at least in my book, I like to think that what I was writing about was how I tried to invent my own future. And so maybe every time we write, we got the opportunity to do something like that, and we shouldn't be discouraged when whatever we expect the payoff to be isn't actually the payoff. So,
in writing A Question of Freedom, when you were thinking about the narrative arc of the book, were you resisting the redemption story?
I had this, Elizabeth Alexander wrote an essay. It's like A Black Boy Says Sorbet, and it was like certain stories will always be in vogue about black men. And I guess I got one of those stories. I mean, I went to prison at 16, came home, went to community college, went to University of Maryland, went to Prince George's Community College, graduated with honors, went to University of Maryland, got an MFA, decided to go to law school. I was sitting in the law library at Harvard Law School, said I was going to get into Harvard. I mean, it's a way in which I could tell that story, and it's like, oh shit, that, like, damn, you did that? But it's a way in which, like, if you buy into your own myth in that way and you begin to mythologize yourself and you ain't even, like, dead yet, and then you begin to sort of put those pieces together as if you didn't have, like, a lot of people there, like, providing support and providing the things that were necessary to sort of guide you through all of those paces, that is dangerous. So I guess when I wrote the book, I was resisting that in terms of me wanting to say that this story wasn't about redemption per se. And the book ends with me just leaving prison. Like, leaving prison is a good thing, I think, but it's not the height of anything. You know, I mean, that's the tragedy for a lot of people. Like, leaving is the height. But one of the reasons why leaving is the height is because you leave and you come home and you can't get into college because people stigmatize you because you have a record, and you can't get a job because people stigmatize you because you have a record. And every apartment I've ever applied to has said, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And they say, we're doing a background check. And I always say, no, I've never been convicted of a felony. And I've never been denied an apartment because these people aren't really doing background checks. And so the question is only to box out people who say, yes, I've been convicted of a felony, which to me is an absurdity, but it's something that happens regularly. You know, you come home and you can't vote and you want to engage in politics. Maybe not politics today because it's kind of like a farce, but when politics are legit, like you want to engage in politics, or maybe you also want to engage in politics when it looks like what it does today because you think your engagement will change some small part of the conversation. But you can't because you have a record. And so that's why I've resisted it. And I wanted to say that, you know, I ended just when I left prison. And I didn't end, you know, with any of the accomplishments that I had at that point. I just ended with this fact that I just left. And I wanted the story to not just be about me, but to be about the people who were still there.